Welcome to Beyond the Call, Medal of Honor Stories. Today's story highlights the incredible bravery and selfless sacrifice of Captain Joseph Xavier Grant during the Vietnam War. Before we begin, don't forget to visit our website at trackpads.com, where you'll find more stories, podcasts, and multimedia content honoring America's military heroes. It was November 13, 1966, in the dense jungles near Plei, Djereng, Vietnam. The air was thick with humidity, and the oppressive silence was suddenly shattered by fierce gunfire and devastating mortar explosions. Soldiers of Company A desperately tried to hold their hastily formed defensive positions as enemy forces surged forward in relentless waves, intent on overwhelming the American lines. Amid the chaos and rapidly mounting casualties stood Captain Joseph Grant, determined to protect his men at any cost. He knew the odds were stacked against them, yet retreat was not an option. With enemy fire intensifying and wounded soldiers scattered across the battlefield, Grant repeatedly risked his life, exposing himself to rescue his fallen comrades. Despite suffering a severe shoulder wound, he refused medical attention, insisting instead on returning to the front line to inspire and direct his men. When a deadly enemy machine gun pinned down his position, Grant courageously crawled forward under heavy fire and silenced it with grenades, allowing him to save yet another wounded soldier. Tragically, moments after rescuing additional men from enemy fire, Captain Grant was killed instantly by mortar fire, making the ultimate sacrifice to save others. In this edition of Beyond the Call, Medal of Honor Stories, we share the extraordinary courage of Captain Joseph Xavier Grant, whose actions near Plei Djereng became a powerful symbol of bravery, leadership, and selfless dedication. His story exemplifies the highest ideals of sacrifice and reminds us of what it truly means to go beyond the call. Historical context. In late 1966, the Vietnam War was reaching a boiling point, especially in the rugged, mountainous terrain along the border of Cambodia. Intelligence reports warned of a significant enemy buildup near two critical U.S. Special Forces bases, at Plei Djereng and Duc Co, prompting American commanders to launch an aggressive military response. The goal was simple but daunting: locate and neutralize enemy forces, protect strategic locations, and secure this fiercely contested region. U.S. troops, including elements of the 25th Infantry Division, moved swiftly into position, knowing they were about to face intense resistance. By late October, American soldiers began pushing deeper into enemy territory. They faced challenging terrain, thick jungles, steep hills, and nearly invisible enemy positions. Initially, resistance was scattered, but that quickly changed as enemy units started striking U.S. forces with nighttime ambushes and coordinated attacks. By early November, the fighting had intensified dramatically, with U.S. soldiers confronting well-prepared North Vietnamese units determined to halt the American advance. On November 5, 1966, several American battalions began a determined push north into the heart of enemy-held territory, hoping to cut off enemy supply lines. A special force called Task Force Prong, made up of Army and Special Forces soldiers, moved directly west toward Cambodia. Almost immediately, Task Force Prong faced fierce enemy ambushes that lasted for hours, revealing the strength and preparedness of enemy troops hidden in the dense jungle. Just days later, on November 11th, American forces tried to stabilize the increasingly volatile situation. Soldiers from the 1st Battalion, 12th Infantry Regiment landed by helicopter at a position called Firebase Red Warrior, quickly becoming targets for intense mortar fire and massive enemy infantry assaults. North Vietnamese troops launched relentless human wave attacks, pushing American defenses to their limits. Only the support of Air Force Skyraider planes dropping napalm, bombs, and machine gun fire allowed the U.S. troops to hold their position and repel the enemy assault. Amidst this chaotic and violent campaign, on November 13th, Captain Joseph Xavier Grant and his soldiers from Company A, 1st Battalion, 14th Infantry Regiment, found themselves in one of the fiercest engagements yet. Grant and his unit fought desperately against waves of enemy soldiers, struggling to hold their ground under overwhelming fire. It was in this desperate fight that Grant displayed the incredible courage and sacrifice that would earn him the Medal of Honor. His leadership under fire would ultimately become one of the defining moments of this intense conflict. Even after Grant's battle, the fighting continued across the region. American forces uncovered large enemy camps, engaging in ferocious battles, often suffering heavy casualties themselves. On November 21st, an entire platoon from the 1st Battalion, 5th Cavalry Regiment, was tragically overrun, demonstrating how costly and brutal the fight had become. Despite superior American firepower and relentless efforts, the battle often felt inconclusive, highlighting the immense challenges faced by soldiers in Vietnam's unforgiving jungles. By late December, the fighting finally wound down, leaving mixed results for both sides. Official American reports claimed over 1,200 enemy casualties, but American losses were heavy too, nearly 400 killed and more than 1,400 wounded. North Vietnamese forces also claimed victory, asserting they had inflicted heavy losses on the Americans. Regardless of these conflicting reports, the operation underscored the grim reality of Vietnam, a brutal conflict marked by tremendous courage and sacrifice, yet often without a clear or decisive outcome. Personal background: Joseph Xavier Grant was born on March 28, 1940, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and later moved to Boston, where he grew up surrounded by the bustling streets of a vibrant city. In 1958, during a time of heightened patriotism and Cold War tensions, Grant decided to enlist in the United States Army. Quickly recognized for his leadership skills and resilience, he rose steadily through the ranks, earning the respect and trust of his fellow soldiers. His dedication, combined with genuine care and concern for those under his command, made him an admired and effective officer as he transitioned from the streets of Boston to the challenging terrain of Vietnam. Tragically, Grant's life and promising military career came to an abrupt end on November 13, 1966, when he was killed in action. His heroic actions that day would later earn him not only a posthumous promotion to the rank of captain, but also the Medal of Honor. Presented to his family at the Pentagon by the Secretary of the Army in 1967, today, Captain Joseph Xavier Grant rests at Arlington National Cemetery, honored among America's greatest heroes. His legacy continues to inspire soldiers, leaders, and everyday citizens, reminding us all of the profound sacrifices made by those who serve their nation. Medal of Honor. Here is the official Medal of Honor citation for Captain Joseph Xavier Grant. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, Company A was participating in a search-and-destroy operation when the leading platoon made contact with the enemy and a fierce firefight ensued. Captain Grant was ordered to disengage the two remaining platoons and to maneuver them to envelop and destroy the enemy. After beginning their movement, the platoons encountered intense automatic weapons and mortar fire from the front and flank. Captain Grant was ordered to deploy the platoons in a defensive position. As this action was underway, the enemy attacked, using human wave assaults in an attempt to literally overwhelm Captain Grant's force. In a magnificent display of courage and leadership, Captain Grant moved, under intense fire, along the hastily formed defensive line, repositioning soldiers to fill gaps created by the mounting casualties and inspiring and directing the efforts of his men to successfully repel the determined enemy onslaught. Seeing a platoon leader wounded, Captain Grant hastened to his aid, in the face of the massive fire of the entire enemy force, and moved him to a more secure position. During this action, Captain Grant was wounded in the shoulder. Refusing medical treatment, he returned to the forward part of the perimeter, where he continued to lead and to inspire his men by his own indomitable example. While attempting to evacuate a wounded soldier, he was pinned down by fire from an enemy machine gun. With a supply of hand grenades, he crawled forward under a withering hail of fire and knocked out the machine gun, killing the crew, after which he moved the wounded man to safety. Learning that several other wounded men were pinned down by enemy fire forward of his position, Captain Grant disregarded his painful wound and led 5 men across the fire-swept open ground to effect a rescue. Following the return of the wounded men to the perimeter, a concentration of mortar fire landed in their midst, and Captain Grant was killed instantly. His heroic actions saved the lives of a number of his comrades and enabled the task force to repulse the vicious assaults and defeat the enemy. Captain Grant's actions reflect great credit upon himself and were in keeping with the finest traditions of the United States Army. The Battle and Medal of Honor actions. On November 13, 1966, First Lieutenant Joseph Xavier Grant and his soldiers from Company A were deep in the dense jungles near Plei Djereng in the central highlands of Vietnam. Their mission that day was a search-and-destroy operation, locate enemy fighters hidden within the jungle, and neutralize the threat. Suddenly, without warning, the lead platoon was hit by intense gunfire from concealed enemy positions, triggering an immediate and chaotic firefight. Captain Grant instantly received orders to maneuver his two remaining platoons strategically, attempting to surround and defeat the enemy, but as Grant tried to reposition his troops, intense enemy fire, automatic weapons and mortars, began raining down from multiple directions, severely threatening their position and putting the lives of his soldiers in serious jeopardy. Recognizing how dangerous their situation had quickly become, Captain Grant decisively changed tactics, shifting from an offensive approach to setting up a strong defensive perimeter. Under heavy enemy pressure, North Vietnamese troops launched relentless human wave assaults, massive groups of soldiers charging directly at the American lines, hoping to overwhelm and overrun Grant's position through sheer numbers. Casualties mounted quickly, creating alarming gaps in the defensive lines. Mid this intense chaos, Captain Grant moved fearlessly under heavy enemy fire along the hastily formed defensive perimeter, repositioning soldiers, closing critical gaps, and rallying the morale of his men to hold the line against seemingly impossible odds. As the fierce fighting continued, Captain Grant saw one of his platoon leaders severely wounded and lying exposed under direct enemy fire. Without hesitation or regard for his own safety, Grant raced through a hail of enemy bullets and exploding mortars, reaching the wounded platoon leader and carrying him back to safety. In doing so, Grant himself was painfully wounded in the shoulder, but he flatly refused medical treatment, insisting instead that he return immediately to the front line to keep leading his men. Despite severe pain and exhaustion, Grant continued directing the defense, inspiring his soldiers by his courageous example and unwavering resolve. Shortly after this heroic rescue, Grant was informed that another wounded soldier was trapped in an exposed position, pinned down by deadly enemy machine gun fire. Determined not to leave his comrade behind, Grant grabbed a supply of hand grenades and crawled deliberately forward through a relentless storm of bullets, inching closer toward the enemy position. In an incredible act of bravery and accuracy, Grant single-handedly silenced the enemy machine gun nest by throwing grenades, eliminating the threat and killing its crew. This courageous act allowed him to rescue yet another critically wounded soldier, whom he carried safely back into the defensive perimeter, further boosting the morale of his exhausted troops. Even after this extraordinary display of courage, Grant's bravery was not yet finished. He learned that several more wounded soldiers were trapped beyond the perimeter, vulnerable and exposed to enemy fire. Grant did not hesitate. He gathered 5 soldiers, and together they crossed open, exposed ground under heavy enemy fire, successfully reaching the wounded men. Tragically, as Grant and his group were returning to the safety of the perimeter with their rescued comrades, enemy mortar rounds suddenly fell around them. One shell exploded close by, instantly killing Lieutenant Grant, and marking the ultimate sacrifice he made in his relentless effort to save his fellow soldiers. Grant's courageous actions profoundly shaped the outcome of that brutal day. His bravery under extreme enemy fire, his tireless commitment to rescuing wounded soldiers, and his inspiring leadership allowed Company A to repel repeated enemy attacks and ultimately survive that ferocious assault. Joseph Xavier Grant's final acts became a powerful example of bravery, sacrifice, and selflessness, forever remembered by the men who survived and honored by everyone who hears his incredible story. Captain Joseph Xavier Grant's heroism at Plei Djereng offers timeless lessons on leadership, especially the power of leading by example under incredibly challenging conditions. His story reminds us that true courage isn't about never feeling fear. Rather, it's about stepping forward and doing what's necessary, despite being afraid and despite overwhelming odds. By repeatedly risking his own life to save his soldiers, Grant showed the kind of selflessness and dedication that define true leaders. He made it clear that genuine leadership means putting the safety and welfare of your people ahead of your own comfort and even your own survival. Grant's actions also underline a deep ethical lesson that applies not only to military leadership but to anyone in a position of responsibility. His willingness to continually expose himself to danger to rescue wounded soldiers sets an unmistakable standard of integrity and care for others. Leaders today, whether in the military or civilian life, can learn from Grant the importance of being responsible, compassionate, and committed to those they lead. His story teaches us that doing the right thing often demands significant personal sacrifice, and that true leadership always involves looking out for those around us. Finally, Grant's bravery offers powerful lessons that extend far beyond the battlefield, applicable to anyone facing daunting challenges in their personal or professional lives. His relentless determination, resilience, and moral courage remind us of how critical it is to persevere through difficulty, remain decisive in tough moments, and always prioritize the well-being of others. Grant's legacy encourages each of us to confront our fears, embrace responsibility fully, and remain committed to our teammates, colleagues, and communities, even when the cost is high. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Call Medal of Honor Stories. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share the podcast to help keep these stories alive. You can also visit trackpads.com. There you'll find more military history, photos, videos, and additional podcast episodes covering the battles and warriors that shake history.